What's up, everyone? I'm coming to you straight from the Poconos Mountains here in Pennsylvania, and it looks like I got a couple of visitors over here. Hey buddy, what's up? Stick around, you might learn something with me today. Now, in the last episode, we were talking about how expectations are set by different levels of people around us, and the level that's furthest removed from us is society and culture in general, and what I call the background or echo noise that permeates through our daily lives and affects our subconscious and consciousness in setting up these goals and hurdles that we call our expectations. Now, over here in Asia, there's a saying that the nail that sticks out gets hammered in, and that's basically telling you that if you don't conform, you're going to be made to conform, and that permeates throughout all of society. And this came essentially from 4th century BC, back in the days of China and back in the Zhou dynasty, when there was a lot of decline and a lot of violence and tough times for society. And so out of that cauldron emerged essentially a golden age of thinking in Chinese history. Now, Confucius created what we call today as filial piety, and what it boiled down to was respecting your elders and your family. And you would always bow down to them, you would always listen to what they had to say, you would always follow and support them. Now, filial piety played a big role in helping culture and society to fix and make amends to all the terrible things that were going back at that time. And what happened was it spread beyond just the family. This concept of obedience, of respect towards your elders permeated beyond the family and into companies, work, even just social settings at school and in government institutions. And it basically pervaded the entire society where, the respect for elders essentially was a valued and very important thing for everybody to follow and practice. And it did help China get out of that dark period of time. Now, what happened after that is the Chinese influence spread. It wasn't just kept in mainland China. It went to the peninsula of Korea, to Japan, and carried over south to southern parts of Southeast Asia. And with that came this filial piety way of existing. And so this culture permeates through much of Asia. Basically, anywhere you go that has had some level of Chinese influence, you will see a form of filial piety. For example, I live in Singapore, and there's quite a deep Chinese influence. And I'll tell you a story about how obvious this filial piety impacts culture there. I like to cycle, so I go on bike rides on the weekend. And we go in packs, and we go 50, 100 kilometers around the island. Now, one time we were cycling around with a group, and there was a kid who, in one of the rest stops, was telling us about how he ran into some trouble with one of the other cyclists who happened to be a more elder cyclist. And apparently what happened was the elder cyclist was very angry that this kid basically overtook him while we were cycling. And that's just not acceptable because, how can a kid be overtaking an elder guy even if, they don't even really know each other and met for the first time? You're not supposed to do that because you're supposed to respect the elder. And that really troubled the kid. And I told him, look, don't worry about it. You can overtake me anytime and I'll follow you. It's all right to, do well and exercise and become the best. But that's just one of the many stories you see out here where, people have to kind of limit themselves and not express themselves and kind of batten down what they can do because of filial piety and out of respect, not to overdo or go out of bounds and step on other people's toes and outshine them simply because they're older. Now, as a Korean, this is a very strong piece of our culture. You never ever say no or shout back or, disobey an elder. And that happens, it doesn't matter where, right? It doesn't matter if you're in the bus and talking with people randomly. It doesn't matter if it's at work, especially at work. You better not ever overstep your bounds with somebody who's elder. It happens at any place, including at school and at places of religious worship. Doesn't matter. Basically, you have to understand and listen to the elders and respect them without any question. Now, in the workplace, it gets a little tricky because sometimes it doesn't line up. Sometimes the superior person in ranking is not necessarily the elder person, because, it doesn't always happen that way in sync. So you'll have the situations where like the superior is younger. Now they try to minimize that kind of stuff by the way they promote people so that you don't get out of order that way. But they do exist, especially across companies when they do business meetings and whatnot. And it creates a very strange situation, right? But ultimately what still matters and trumps everything else is your age. And even if there's a disagreement or something that doesn't work out, it is done in such a respectful way because the other person is just older. And this happens not only in Korea but in Japan. It's a similar situation, and of course parts of China and anywhere else that the Chinese influence has spread to over in East Asia. Conformity ensures that things go according to plan, and so it allows you to plan forward and for things to operate efficiently. But a conformity doesn't really help with innovation and thinking in different ways because, well, you're not conforming, and why would you want to distort and disorient what works? And you'll see this in a lot of the Asian cultures. You see in Japan and Korea, in Singapore, these countries are very operationally efficient, but when it comes to creating something that's totally new and out of the box, well, it doesn't happen. Like the internet wasn't invented in Asia, for example. And so this is a theory that some people have been talking about, and that innovation in Asia is challenging because of conformity driven by filial piety. And actually that's not the case, and something we can discuss further in future episodes. In fact, I've got some pretty good experience in innovation, both out in Silicon Valley and in Singapore and in Asia. And I want to share with you what I've learned, what is real and what actually is not real between the two different parts of the world when it comes to innovative thinking and culture. We need to respect and understand this background noise, this society level cultural expectations, because it's all around us in this part of the world. Well, actually I'm in America now, but if you go to East Asia, it's all around you in that part of the world. And it's something that since you're born and raised from your childhood to all the way to the end, something you deal with, right? And something you live with, something you practice, something you may even appreciate and promote. There's a lot of this background echo that permeates your existence if you live and grew up in East Asia. And it's something you just have to acknowledge and deal with. But the key is you need to understand how these things filter up into your own assessment of what expectations are. And I'm not talking about people like your friends and family and coworkers and all that. I'm talking about just the background info. Background info meaning people you just see, how they behave on the bus and the train, or even things you see on TV or online through social media. The behavior that you see all around you that everybody's practicing, you absorb that and you also internalize that yourself. So that background echo, that base layer that you're existing on top of, is actually also your base layer internally. And all the things that they value and things that they think you should do, you begin to think the same thing as well, which is fine because you have to assimilate and live within the culture and society that you are in. However, the problem becomes an issue when you forget about that and you make the mistake where you start thinking basically that that's your personal expectations and settings. And sometimes they're at odds with actually your real personal expectations and settings. And this clash internally that happens leads to a lot of angst and grief for many people. And if there's a clash internally between what is expected through background echo and noise and what you internally feel, let's say you're somebody who's an extrovert and wants to voice your opinion, and it's very difficult for you to keep things in and not just say anything or express it. You are at odds and you are at a disadvantage compared to somebody who's naturally like that, somebody who maybe is more of an introvert. And so you need to understand who you are as a person and how that mixes with the background echo in the culture and society that you live with, and that if you are in fact in East Asia, that these things may impact the way you perceive what you think is expected of you. And you shouldn't take something personally that is not naturally inclined for you to be as an issue that just because you happen to be living in this part of the world and growing up in this type of a society is a failure for you. That is not what you should be doing. And that's the main message I want to share with all of you out there today. Now, in the next episode, we're going to talk about the Western culture, which is all about the individualism and me, and the benefits of that, but then also at the same time, some of the trade-offs. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to be in the next episode, but I look forward to seeing you then. Happy New Year.